Alright, so we at Football Ledger don't provide the update. We rather try to understand what that update would mean for the associated club and football in general. And as you would have heard by now, that Xavi will be staying at Barcelona. So in this video, we'll be breaking down his tenure till now. We'll try and understand the circumstances under which he joined and how he changed things. The good and the bad he did. We'll also compare his last year's Barca with this year. And we'll give a brief thought on what does Xavi's staying mean for Barca and what can we expect from Xavi's Barca for next year. So without any further ado, let's begin our video. Now Xavi joined Barca at a problematic time. It was November 2021 and the club was struggling both on and off the pitch. They were coached by Ronald Koeman and was placed 9th in the league table. Having experimented with coaches like Quique Setien and Ronald Koeman, Barca in terms of their playing style was, let's say, not as attractive as they used to be. And in terms of their finances, they were struggling would be an understatement. So the fans obviously wanted a change and a positive one on that. Xavi on the other hand was coaching Al Sadd, a team in Qatar, and was actually having a good time in the Gulf. In his 2.5 years expanding 97 games in all competition, he won 7 trophies with them, even reaching the semi-finals of the Asian Champions League. Now although the standard of Qatari league is lower when you compare it with the football played in Europe, but Xavi played attractive brand of football with them, using his Cruyff-inspired total football style, and his stocks were high at that point. Joan Laporta on the other hand had just been the club's president since March of that year, and with the club struggling, he struck a sensible deal with Xavi to make him Barca's manager till 2024. Because he was a club legend as a player, and as a coach he'll play that Cruyff-inspired football. Both these facts will keep the fans happy and excited for the coming season. Now on a side note, Xavi was not the first choice of Laporta it would seem when he was running for the presidency, as it was another candidate, Victor Font, who said that if I am selected, Xavi will be Barca's manager. Anyway, Xavi at that point was the perfect choice to keep the fans happy at a tough situation, and he gave a good start when his first game against their Catalan rival Espanyol 1-0 at home. And everything media spoke of Xavi's coaching sounded good if you were a fan. They said he implemented stricter rules for the players, like reintroduction of fines, early arrival for training, and tracking players off the pitch activities. And throughout that year, Barca's on-the-field performances improved as well. He took them from 9th place to a 2nd place finish by the end of 2021-22 season. So for obvious reasons, fans were excited for his first full season. Now it was clear that Barca needed signings if they were to challenge Real Madrid at the top. And although they were still struggling financially, President Laporta famously pulled some levers to get some money so he could go into the transfer market, and provided Xavi with some decent signings. To name a few, they were Rafinha, Jules Koundé, Robert Lewandowski, Pablo Torre, Frank Kessie, Christensen, Marcos Alonso and more. And now with a new manager and some decent signings, Barca had created a team that on paper could challenge for all the titles. And despite being inexperienced at the highest stage, Xavi managed to provide Barca with domestic success. The first trophy he won was Supercopa de España, beating Real Madrid 3-1 in the final. And although they got eliminated in the Copa del Rey, they were not losing focus in La Liga. And on 14th May 2023, Barca won the La Liga title, with Xavi leading the club to its first league title since 2018-19 season. But he was not able to reflect this performance in the European front, as he was eliminated to the Europa League from the group stages of the Champions League 2 years in a row. And the highest he managed in Europa was reaching quarterfinals. But still, he gave Barca fans reasons to believe, and in September it was announced that he will be extending his contract till 2025. So what was looking like a start of Xavi era became a nightmare for him the next season. Now let's understand how that happened. Now, Barca had not challenged for the title since 2018-19 season, and their squad after heavyweights like Messi, Suarez and others left was not among the feared teams in Europe, nor they had the financial pull like they had before. And La Liga still is a tough league to win. So considering all that, Xavi winning La Liga in his first full season was a big achievement. But Xavi, unlike Ronald Koeman or Quique Setien, even in the financial crunch, was provided with some signings to maintain a certain level. And a team like Barca would always want to be amongst the European elites, which requires a club to have financial muscle. And to keep that cash flow active, Barca had to maintain a high level domestically while improving their results in Europe. And for that, they will need to have good players who cannot join the club if they don't have money. So it was like a circle, which Xavi would have been hoping to get the club out of. But Barca suffered a major loss in the transfer market in the beginning of the 23-24 season. Amongst the many players that left the club that year, Barca saw Sergio Busquets and Ousmane Dembélé leave. Now Busquets played as a defensive midfielder and had been one of the most important players for Barca for past 15 years, and even for Xavi's title run the previous year. And Barca had been waiting forever for Dembélé to reach the expected level, and now when he finally became the team's most viable attacking threat, He forced his way out of the club to join PSG, and that would have been a tough pill to swallow for the Blaugranas, and a hard situation to get through for Xavi. And although there were other departures like Umtiti, Jordi Alba, Longley, but none were as missed as Busquets, who controlled the midfield and defense, and Dembele, who was the main threat in attack under Xavi. Now it should also be mentioned that Xavi also got some decent additions to the squad, like Gundogan on a free, Joao Cancelo and Felix on loan, and others like Victor Roque, Oriol Romeu, Inigo Martinez, etc. And with that, their season began, and they got on to a decent start. They were getting good results without losing any games. They even thrashed Antwerp and Real Betis by 5 goals. And last year Barca played more defensively, while this year where Xavi was trying to play a little more attractive brand of football. So things were looking decent, all signs were positive, and then came the El Clasico in October, where Barca were favourites as they haven't lost a game till now, while Madrid had already lost to Atletico in the Metropolitano, and a win at their temporary home against their biggest rivals could have set them up for the season. And they started the game well, scoring first through Gundogan, but Los Blancos came back by a goal scored by Bellingham in the second half, and then he won it for Real Madrid, scoring in the 92nd minute. It was a bad second half by the whole team, and even their new signing Ilkay Gundogan questioned the attitude of the players after the match. And from that day, Madrid haven't lost a single game, while Barca's performance went downhill. Supercopa de España, a competition in which they beat Madrid last year, this time they were thrashed by their Clásico rivals by 4 goals. And apart from that, their performance against the mid-table sides in La Liga was underwhelming. They lost points against teams like Getafe, Mallorca, Granada, Rayo Vallecano, Valencia and others. Their defense, which was the strongest in Europe just a year ago, was conceding goals from everywhere. Players like Joao Felix and Gundogan were not having the expected effects, and Lewandowski, who was league's top scorer last year, saw a major dip in his form this time, because of which Barca's goal-scoring avenues were reduced. So team on the pitch was not looking good. Now at that point I felt that they were missing Busquets, as the defensive structure was disturbed and they could not create a lot building from the back. And as you can expect, the media wasn't helping Xavi in any way. And I don't know if you have heard this, but the media in Spain is quite famous to get into the nerves of the managers. And I have talked about this in a previous video, but Real Madrid and Barcelona, the amount of pressure they get from the media is way too much. You can imagine when coaches like Zidane and Guardiola could not take it anymore. So there was that, but another point was, despite being a man of the club through tough times, the fans and the club executives believed that Xavi ended up underperforming. Now imagine Xavi's situation. He has been a legend of a club as a player, won everything and retired, then went to a country far away to get some coaching experience, and while he was enjoying his life there, he was called up to become Barca's manager, and he, being a loyal supporter, answered the call, took the club from 9th to 2nd place in his first stint, which was not even a complete season, and then he won the league next year. And despite being many off-the-field struggles for Barca this season, Xavi was the only one to face all the criticism. In my opinion, a bit unfair. So things were going like this, and the team was struggling on the field. There were some heavy losses, including a 4-2 loss to Girona in the league, a 4-1 loss to Madrid in the Spanish Super Cup, and a 4-2 loss to Athletic Club in the Copa. And by this point, even the fans started showing their disappointment. But things reached a boiling point at the match versus Villarreal. It was a dramatic match with tensions on the field, where Barca first came up from 2 goals down to 3-2, but in the end, Barca lost the match by 3 goals to 5 at their home. And that was it. Xavi had been saying for a long time that if I had to leave for the benefit of the club, I would leave. And in the post-match conference, he announced that he would leave Barca at the end of the season. But let me take you a few days back. Athletic reported that Xavi has been contemplating this for past few months. But it was after their match against Real Madrid in the Supercopa final, he shared his decision to leave with his wife and brother. So that tells that he had been under pressure for a long time before that. But what surprises me is Xavi is someone who has spent his whole life with Barcelona, and he must be surely aware about the pressure, so one would assume that he'd be prepared for that, but he still decided to leave. Now let's understand what made him make that decision. See, the simple answer for this is there was a lot of pressure, but for the Barca nerds out there, I've broken it down into 3 parts. You see, I was surprised to know that Xavi was someone who was interested in knowing what was said around him, and even followed the daily radio programs and TV shows. A club source told The Athletic that he also read the press too much, and that's unhealthy, because in there were stuff like polls, where they were asking stuff like, should Xavi be sacked by now? Now when your team is doing good, the media could be fun, but when you're performing bad, the media could be a nightmare, and all of this could have been affecting him majorly. And on the other hand, the hierarchy expected Xavi to deal with the demands of the club in a more healthy manner, given his Barca background. It was also mentioned that multiple Barca executives had been criticizing the team's performance for months. Also, they thought that there was a lack of intensity in the training sessions organized by his staff. They actually wanted Laporta to sack Xavi after the Super Cup loss, but Laporta was still backing Xavi, and that was putting more pressure on him. See, in a club like Barca, a manager has to have some people in the management whom he can trust. with whom he can share his vision, and with Xavi, it was Barca's ex-sporting director, Jordi Cruyff. Cruyff and Xavi had established a close bond. They both were on the same page on how the squad should be assembled, and Cruyff took a stand for Xavi amongst the board of directors. And just a day after celebrating the league title, Jordi Cruyff announced that he would be leaving. This happened because Barca's senior management was already working on the arrival of Deco in the sporting direction department, and Cruyff felt that there was no space for him. And a few months later, Cruyff's partner in role, Matteo Alemany, also left, and Xavi was planning for the future with these guys. So I believe that Xavi would have felt his influence in the club diminishing. Now Deco was leading the sporting direction department, and Xavi has publicly stated that his relation with Deco is perfectly fine. But see, I don't know if they are on the same page, as the biggest investment Barca made with Deco was Brazilian striker Victor Roque, and even with an out-of-form Lewandowski, Roque was not preferred by Xavi, and it would seem that he's behind the La Masia graduate Marc Guiu in the pecking order. Now he can be a player for future, but it was clear that Xavi wanted a holding midfielder to replace Busquets. His target were Zubimendi, Joshua Kimmich and Marcelo Brozovic, but he could only get Oriol Romeo, who, as you know, is not lighting up the pitch. So Xavi must have been feeling helpless, getting questioned in the media, with visible distrust in the management and no one in the sporting department to share his vision. Now lastly, the toxicity of the Barca environment was not only affecting him but also his family. Being a manager of a football club is a tough job for the person himself but also for his family members, as the man has to deal with a lot of pressure and him and his family has to get used to it over time. And for someone who has not spent much time being a manager and all of a sudden dealing with ongoings of one of the biggest sporting institutions in the world must be overwhelming. And now to a next chapter. Now looking at the reasons mentioned previously, it was natural that he wanted to leave, and he mentioned multiple times that his decision is not going to change. But to surprise of many, after his announcement, Barca's performance improved drastically. They went 13 games unbeaten, even beating Napoli in the UCL round of 16 and PSG in the first leg of quarterfinals. And with a good run of form, in exact 91 days after his announcement, he performed a U-turn and decided to stay. Following a meeting with Laporta at his house, the media surrounded the place. Sporting director Deco and vice president Rafa Just were among the other members in the club's hierarchy. Xavi arrived, and within minutes, sources confirmed to ESPN that there was an agreement for him to remain at the club. Now why he decided to stay? Well, his official explanation was the support he received from the president, the board of directors, the players, the supporters during the past 3 months changed his mind. And Xavi says that he still has the energy and the project he wanted to build with the talented spine of youngsters is not finished yet. Okay, I hear you, Xavi, but if you listen to Spanish press, they had different reasons. Like Barca were forced to keep Xavi because they would have had to pay him the compensation for his contract till 2025. Xavi anyways denied this and said that he was ready to waive off the amount. And I can believe that. But if Barca were financially healthy and if it were up to them, I believe they would be more happy to have a coach like Jurgen Klopp in the sidelines, because we know that Barca was considering other options like Hansi Flick and Thomas Tuchel. In the end, Rafa Marquez was the main contender to replace Xavi, but none of those options were suitable. And do you know why? Because Barca would not want an average coach, and good coaches would be hesitant to join Barca now. And Barca themselves are not in a place where they can cater to every demand of a new coach. Now imagine a coach like Thomas Tuchel or Hansi Flick coming in, and instead of working with the Barca youth, they demand more physical players to implement their system. And one thing we know is that Barca is not known for its physicality, so that could have been a different problem altogether. Even Rafa Marquez, who has been coaching the Barca B team and doing a decent job at that, if he came in and flopped, Barca's frailty in terms of unable to rebuild a team will be in front of the whole world. And like how coaches are hesitant to join Man United now, they will have questions about joining Barca as well. So the best option that Barca management had was Xavi, because first of all, he's the one who brought this exciting academy graduates to the first team and understands the situation at the club perfectly and can succeed with the current batch of players. And if he failed, they can put the blame on Xavi and his lack of experience again, as it happened before. Which brings us to our next point. See, from Barca's perspective, Xavi was the best option they could have, because as far as I know, Xabi Alonso is not available. But jokes apart, there is no decent coach in the world that will come in and be happy to work with practically no signings of his choice. They will want to build a new project, which to be honest, Barca is not in a position to begin. So Xavi staying is best for Barcelona. Now from Xavi's perspective, I don't think it's the best choice he could have made. Now I understand his love for the club and I'm no one to question his decision. But we already know the problems he had this season and how it affected him and his family. But just in terms of his career, him staying at Barca is not ideal, because he has done well till now. He won the league and the Super Cup in 2.5 years, reached the quarterfinals of the Champions League with this team, and I understand that it's not good enough from a Barcelona standpoint, but still a decent outcome with the available resources. But if he fails to deliver this time, his stock will go down and will not be considered a viable coaching option, just like what happened with Frank Lampard at Chelsea. So there's that. Now please note that it is possible for him to turn things around. Yes, it is his project after all, and he is building something exciting with players like Kubarsi, Mark Q, Fermin Lopez, and most importantly, Lamine Yamal. Also, Xavi would return next year, and if Pedri's injury woes goes behind him, the squad is not that bad if you see. Now, I also want to highlight that the reason for Barca's underperformance this year is mainly because their defense digressed. Because in La Liga, in terms of their attack, they are more or less the same. They scored 70 goals last year with an average of 1.84 goals per game, and this year they created more chances and have already scored 64 goals, which is 2 goals per game. But if you look at their defense, they were conceding 0.53 goals per game, which this year has gone up to 1.16 goals, which is more than double compared to last year. So for me, defense is an area that Xavi needs to improve, and with personnel like Araujo, Koundé, Christensen and Kubarsi, he already have a decent roster. Now, do I believe in Xavi to improve? See, I'm no expert, but Xavi has shown some signs that he can keep it tight defensively. But again, he has to play that total football associated with Barca, and that takes away from defense. So it would be interesting to see the approach he takes. And one more thing that he has to work on is improvement on finishing the chances his team create. So overall, I think that Xavi can get a good performance out of this team. But Barca's challenge is Real Madrid, and their squad is already a level above. And for Barca to have a successful season, they cannot do that without beating Real Madrid, because that's the only team they will compete in Spain and maybe in Europe as well. Now, Real already have a complete squad with top players, and not going into all the possible signings, but if this guy arrives at the Bernabeu, it changes the dynamic. Now, before ending the video, I want to say that there's one thing that I'm afraid of. That is, what if Xavi fails? Because if that happens, it shows Barca in a very bad light. Because they are saying that the project is still alive and can come good. And yes, it is very much possible as we just discussed. But if it doesn't happen, I don't think that they have a backup plan. Because Rafa Marquez is not the one, their stadium is under construction, their salary cap is again reduced this year, and Barca also lost on the World Cup spot because they couldn't qualify for the semi-finals. So of course, money problems. And in a situation like this, there are not many good coaches in the world who would want to take a risk of this magnitude. So a lot is dependent on Xavi's performance. Anyways, I've shared my thoughts and I want to listen to yours. So comment down below. I have limited subscribers and I respond to every single comment. So let us discuss. Also, Benzema had a crazy year in Saudi. If you want to know what's happening with him, I have made a video. You can watch it here. Like this video, subscribe to Football Ledger, and see you on the next one. Ciao.